Yesterday, I completed an Ironman as a type 1 diabetic, and I'm going to tell you a story today about how I narrowly avoided having to stop the race for a hospital visit on numerous occasions. If you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Van de Veit. I'm a certified master fitness trainer and nutritionist. I live with type 1 diabetes, and I thought it would be a cool thing to try and challenge myself with pushing the limits of my type 1 diabetes management while pursuing the finish line of an Ironman. And I'm happy to say that as of now, as of last night, late last night, I am an Ironman. And today, I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about that journey, but most importantly, the decision-making process that I use that you can use in your everyday life. Outside of sports, outside of standard diabetes care, really just for everyday life, how you can use this simple trick, 3 steps to better identify and find solutions when blood sugars get crazy. So if you haven't figured it out yet, my blood sugars did go crazy in the race, and I am going to get into a little bit of that story today. Hope you enjoy. So as I mentioned, yesterday was the big day. Finally had a chance to complete an Ironman. Actually, the bracelet that I'm wearing right now, this is good. So the bracelet says Ironman. Obviously, that was my athlete's bracelet. And I went to the medical tent beforehand and got the second bracelet that says type 1 diabetes. And I said, hey, if something goes crazy on the race course, you guys need to know what to do. So how do I notify medical staff? And they got that all set up. So just in case, I thought, there is the chance that things go wrong. It is a very long day. And if you don't know what an Ironman is a 140.6 mile race. So it's known widely as the most difficult single day endurance event on planet Earth. And I can tell you now, on the other side of that, yes, it is. It was very difficult, but rewarding as well. So the race itself is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and then straight into a marathon or 26.2 mile run. All of it is in the same day, no breaks in between, and very challenging, as you can imagine, with type 1 diabetes. I mean, challenging either way, right, for anybody to do that. But with type 1 diabetes, managing blood sugars proved to be an incredibly difficult challenge. And this is something I have spent months trying to master. And unfortunately, even with all of the preparation, things can still go a little off base, a little off plan. So what I wanted to talk to you guys today about was the process that I used when things did go away from the plan that I had, and how I came to that conclusion. Now, I want to make sure that you know there is no medical advice being given in this episode. I'm going to mention some numbers here. I recognize the danger behind what I did, and that's why I want to talk about it. All right, so part of my blood sugar plan is that I need to get an enormous amount of food in at the beginning of my bike ride. And it's because you're skipping breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so you got to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner during the race. Now, dosing insulin during a race is wildly complicated, and the strategies are far too deep as far as specifics go to talk about in one episode. But if you'd like to hear something about that, maybe drop a comment below. We'll make some kind of a different video on that. But long story short, I am meant to deliver, and this is something I worked with a coach on myself as well. So I know a lot of you come to me for coaching. I practice what I preach. I actually have coaches, multiple, that help me. And if you don't know why you would hire a coach, you hire a coach anytime you're trying to accomplish something you've not been able to do before, right? So I've never done an Ironman. I hired a coach to help me with that. A lot of people haven't been able to get their A1C under a 7 or a 6 or a 5, or their time in range to 80, 90, 100% time in range, or do that but also enjoy your life to the max, right? Like for me, I just finished an Ironman, and I've maintained above 90% time in range for the last 5.5 plus years, including training for an Ironman. Like it's just always above 90% time in range, while having a family and traveling and training. So a lot of people come to me as a coach for that kind of stuff. Like, how do I just live my life and feel more normal without blood sugars getting in the way, right? So anyways, I had a coach for my Ironman, multiple. One of them was specific to diabetes. One was specific for training and therapist and all this kind of stuff. My diabetes coach, helped me to come up with this plan on how much insulin to give. And I'm not supposed to talk about specifics behind that, both because it sounds like medical advice, because it basically was medical advice, and two, because I agreed not to share specifics of this person's coaching plan with the general public. That was one of the agreements of us working together. But I can tell you that I chose, based off of the information during my race, based off of blood sugars, insulin on board, all those numbers, I chose to give a 2.4 unit bolus at the beginning of my bike ride. And that was meant to cover my meal that I was going to eat while riding my bike. And that's where things kind of went to out of plan. I would just say that. I did not see blood sugars budge. They were already a little bit higher. They were sitting at, I think, 180. Did a little pre-bolus and everything. And for those of you who might not know, exercise plus insulin on board usually makes the insulin work faster. And so the fact that I hadn't seen blood sugars move had me a little nervous, but I also know that if you miss catching insulin on board while exercising, it can happen in an instant. So I knew, hey, you've given the pre-bolus. If you wait any longer, you run the risk of all of it hitting at once, pushing you into an urgent low, and then bam, you're done. Or at the very least, you're going to have to stop and fix an urgent low, and that could take a half an hour. So I made the decision to start eating and jump into it, and it pushed me right away higher. And that was my first sign. I knew something was wrong. Knew the insulin wasn't doing its job, and added more insulin, and actually set a basal rate increase as well in the background. Nothing happened, gave some more. Nothing happened, gave some more. Long story short, I ended up delivering a total, between basal and bolus increases, a total of 6 units of insulin, stacking them over the course of a couple hours. So stacking insulin, never a good idea. Stacking insulin while exercising, terrible idea. Stacking insulin while exercising in the middle of nowhere, right? Granted, there was medical support at the aid stations, but this is just a horrendous idea. And so what was interesting about this that I thought about later is that easily could have been the end of the race. If that was too much insulin, I would have ended up in the hospital, right? Not just not finishing the race, I would have been in the hospital or died. So how did I know to give 6 units? And why did that work? Because it did work. Finally was able to get blood sugars to come down and balance out. And I spent the rest of the race between, I think it was 117 and 135, something like that. And just perfect. And that's with me consuming about 80 plus carbs per hour while I'm bike riding. And blood sugars just perfectly cruising exactly where they're at. A number of moving variables to this puzzle. And by the way, this is only one of many hiccups that I had during the race. My stomach fought back during the run section when we're in the middle of the marathon, and and you can't eat as a diabetic who is exercising. That's a whole different puzzle, right? Because then you got lows to worry about. While I was still at, my blood sugars were 134. That's a little lower than I'd like to be for going for a marathon and not being able to eat sugar. But that's for the race recap video. Now, what I wanted to get at is that there are going to be situations where you have to adapt. And I've said this in separate episodes before, but adaptation is the superpower that we need to develop within type 1 diabetes management. The rules for type 1 diabetes change day to day, sometimes meal to meal, right? 6 units during exercise, that would have killed me. And I am not saying that lightly. That would have killed me any other day. But I know there are other factors at play. We just finished swimming in the American River and the Sacramento River, 2.5 miles, and it was freezing. So my core temperature, my body temperature was different. I was wildly stressed out for this race. This was the first time I had ever even attempted an Ironman. So stress plays an impact on blood sugars. The night before the race, I got less than 2 hours of broken sleep. Lack of sleep, increase of cortisol, higher insulin resistance, right? All of these things are leading into what would equal higher blood sugar. So I can see the puzzle pieces in my head coming together while I'm stacking 6 units of insulin. And it's making sense, right? But all that to say, it's a little nerve-wracking to do something you've never done before. And that's why I started this episode by saying this is not medical advice, because that, as I mentioned, could have killed me, right? That is a very dangerous thing to do on paper, but the situation called for it. And that is what I find interesting. Now, the big distinction I want to offer you is that you don't just throw insulin at your problems and hope they go away, right? Now, the big differentiator is knowing if you are able to adapt in a way that you're using wisdom, or if you're ignorant to the problem and just trying to make it go away, right? So if you're knowledgeable about the topics, if you understand the root cause, your ability to adapt is much more powerful, right? I knew lack of sleep, increase of cortisol, increase of insulin resistance, stress, increase of cortisol and adrenaline, increase of insulin resistance, super cold temperatures, right? Less circulation ability. So the insulin is not going to move as fast through my system. Okay, so insulin's going to work slower. So I knew a lot of the factors that were at play, and that brings us to step number 1, which is define if you're ignorant or if you're able to adapt with knowledge. And if so, identifying the root cause is going to be your way to go. So day to day, if you see blood sugars that you don't like, or you're just confused by, right? Like I gave a bunch of insulin while exercising and nothing happened. That makes me curious. Why isn't it doing what I thought it was going to do and what it always does? So you have to develop this ability to spot those things with your diabetic detective hat on. And that is a skill set. But if you're unpracticed, what I would do, this is what I work with a lot of my clients on, we call it retrospective analysis, which is essentially looking backwards at variables or factors that could have led into blood sugars that didn't cooperate or just did weird stuff, right? So if I look back at a spike, I'm like, okay, why did that spike in blood sugars happen? Why did I go to 200? Oh, because I had lunch and I forgot to dose for it, right? A very obvious example. Most of us should be able to pinpoint that one. Not everyone would know to pinpoint lack of sleep, cold temperature in the water, or race day stress and adrenaline, right? So the things that you're ignorant to are holding you back. So ultimately, number 1 is the ignorant tax. We've talked about this in the past as well. You don't know what you don't know, and that's dangerous, right? And the best thing you can do is to remove that ignorant tax. But the only way to remove your ignorance is either through experience, repetition, right? To go out and do things and experience the mistakes so that you can learn from your mistakes, or you can learn from the mistakes of others by hiring a coach, right? And this is what I did. I hired a coach to help me out with these plans because I didn't want to have to learn from experience, since I wanted to finish the Ironman race on the first try and not have to learn over 2, 3, 4, 5 races. Actually, my coach told me it took him 8 Ironman races to figure out how it all works for diabetics. I'm like, oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't want to have to do 8 races. That sounds terrible. So first step is to reduce your ignorance either through repetition and experience, or, and that's to learn from your own mistakes, right? So you're learning the hard way, or just go hire a coach who's already done the mistakes and you can just learn from them. And that's always what I prefer if that's an option for me. Now, within step number 1, once you've removed the ignorance, you want to find the root cause. So for me, blood sugars were running higher. Didn't make sense. I wanted to identify the root cause. So I thought through a few of those variables, right? First thought that hit my head, bad sight. And during the swim segment of the Ironman race, I got kicked in the side a few times, which is where my insulin site was. I also got punched in the nose and kicked in the mouth. Okay, Ironman swims are no joke. And it's because you're all really close together, right? You all get launched out into the water and everyone's swimming for their life trying to get a good race time. So nobody cares to look around and see who's nearby. So, I mean, I probably hit somebody else in the face too, with my elbow or something. So I actually thought that I broke my nose, side note. I checked my nose while we were swimming after I got punched in the nose, and I was like, I think I just broke my nose. But it's fine, clearly. It just hurt really bad. So in the water, I got kicked in my insulin pump site, and I was like, shoot, they knocked it out or something happened, right? So my first thought, in trying to identify the root cause, which is step number 1 of this process, is I thought it was my insulin pump site. So I was like, okay, you know what? Clearly the insulin's not working. At this point, it had been an hour since I had delivered the 2.5 units of insulin, by the way, and nothing was working. So I was like, I gotta stop and change my site. So I made a deal with myself. Said, all right, if it doesn't do anything in the next 10 minutes, which gives me 2 CGM updates because my CGM updates every 5 minutes. If it doesn't change and start heading down in the right direction in the next 10 minutes, even by 1 point down in the right direction, then I'm changing it. And then 10 minutes later, my cutoff for myself, it moved down 3 points. And I was like, all right, that counts. Give more insulin. We got to get it done. I guess it's working, just barely, super slow, right? So first step, identify root cause. So I realized it was working, so I didn't have to change my site. Now what else could be causing insulin to work slower or not as well, or what's going on? That's what I started thinking through the other lifestyle variables at play. Now, step number 2 is once you've identified the root cause, or just admitted that you're ignorant to it, but you know something needs to be done, right? Like if I had no idea why the insulin wasn't working, I still need to do something about it. I can't just sit with that problem. So 2, what am I going to do about it? What is the situation calling for? What is the action, right? So step 1, you can identify that as more as awareness. Step 2, action. So what is the situation calling for? I needed to give more insulin. So I increased my basal, I took more bolus, but you hear that and you're probably thinking, Matt, that's absolutely reckless. And you'd be absolutely right in saying that. It wasn't reckless. It was well thought out. You know, I'm cycling, so I'm just staring at pavement while I'm going 20-something miles an hour. So I've got plenty of time to think about what I'm going to do about this site, right? And so I'm thinking through, like, okay, I need to take more insulin. I don't want it to take too much because if I go low, race is done. But if I stay high for too long, I run the risk of going into DKA because this is exercise for, 13, 14 hours today. So I'm going to take an action, going to give more insulin piece by piece. So what I ended up doing was micro-dosing insulin and doing it in small amounts, wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Okay, it's still not going down. So I was waiting to see if the tail of a previous dose from like an hour ago was going to work. And every time it didn't work, I'd add a little more. And then 15 minutes later, I would expect to see the action of a tail from an hour ago. It didn't, so add a little more. So, and this is slightly complicated to rush through. I'm just trying to give you a big picture idea. But the idea behind this is I need to take an action. What is the action I can take from what the situation is demanding from me, right? So big picture, high blood sugars, they probably need more insulin, more water, more movement, something like that. Low blood sugars probably need an insulin adjustment or some sugar, right? So number 2, action. Number 1, awareness. Now number 3 is, do I have an emergency exit? And this was probably the first thought going into these decisions for me because I'm very risk averse when it comes to low blood sugars. I hate low blood sugars more than anything. Okay, it's more than almost anything. They're the worst. So do I have an emergency exit? And for this discussion, I like to think of irreversible versus reversible actions. So any choice that I make, it falls under one of those 2 categories. Either this is reversible, like I chose to wear this Ironman California jersey today, which is what you get when you finish the race. It's like, I got to show it off, right? It says finisher somewhere. Oh, right there. Yeah, so proof that I finished the Ironman. I chose to wear this. That is reversible. I can delete this video. I can take the jersey off and I can refilm this whole thing, right? So it's reversible up until it gets uploaded, I suppose, but I can still delete the video off the internet. So very much a reversible thing. Taking insulin is irreversible. Once you've injected insulin, it's in your system, my friend. It's not going anywhere. Now, the difference here is that on MDI or injections, multiple daily injections, you are truly making an irreversible decision. On an insulin pump, it is irreversible technically, but I can reverse a portion of it by making adjustments to my insulin basal rates, right? So if, for example, let's say my basal rate was 1 unit per hour, right? Which means over the course of an hour, I get 1 unit delivered as the equivalent to my long-acting insulin. if I were to take 1 unit at the beginning of that hour and then turn my pump off completely, 0 insulin being delivered from basal, technically I've canceled out the bolus of insulin that I took, or the injection that I took, right? Because I've given a unit and I've subtracted a unit. So I add 1 minus 1. That is a net 0 effect. So technically, there are ways to make an irreversible decision reversible with an insulin pump. So using that knowledge for me, I thought through giving just enough insulin that if something went wrong, I could turn off my pump and reverse it within 30 minutes. So I didn't deliver any more insulin than it would take for me to reverse within 30 minutes at first. But obviously we got to a point where there were 6 units stacked. And so that's when I started recognizing that I did in fact need a lot more insulin. And sometimes that is the case. And while I did identify the root cause initially, I'll be honest with you guys, I've yet to determine the true root cause outside of it just being race day. I think that my stress levels are so much higher. My wife pointed this out as well. Traditionally, I run higher on race day, even with the presence of additional bolus insulin. So when you're in doubt on what the root cause is, it really helps to zoom out. When in doubt, zoom out. Okay, I'm giving you a bunch of my favorite stuff. This is what I walk through with clients sometimes, and I know a lot of them find it helpful, the type 1 diabetics that I work with. So hopefully this is helpful for you too. But ultimately, I don't like to teach you guys, like, take this much insulin, because that just works once, right? With diabetes, we know the rules change day to day. What I like to teach you instead is how to think differently. And I just gave away my race hat. Dang it. My race jersey, and we'll put up a picture on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. There you go. My race jersey I got custom made, so it says Renegade Warrior Think Differently, and my hat says the same thing. And it's because as diabetics, we're warriors, right? If you're in our ecosystem, in our communities, we call ourselves Renegade Warriors because we're different. We have different standards of ourselves. You know, we're not going to settle for a 7A1C and 70% time in range, which is, yeah, it's mediocre, but it's not good enough for us. We expect to have actual health and actual quality of life with type 1 diabetes. I'm not going to settle for good enough, right? So anyways, I had to think differently, and you're going to have to think differently about this kind of stuff as well. So best thing that I can do is to teach you how to think, not how to do, but how to think. Because if you think the right way, you can apply that across a spectrum of situations. If I teach you how to do, you only know how to do that one thing, right? So that's why a lot of these videos are more conceptual. They're built off of frameworks. Today was step 1, step 2, step 3, got awareness, action, and emergency exit. So AAEE. There you go. That makes it easy for you to remember. So with my my decision with race day, I mean, there were a number of situations like this. I told you, my stomach flipped on me during the run. I couldn't eat. Now I was worried about low blood sugars. It's a complete opposite situation. A number of other things as well that just went wrong. But that's kind of how life is, and I recognize that in the race. I was thinking about this as well, where it's not about trying to avoid those challenges. It's about how you navigate the challenges and embracing it along the way, right? If you fight these challenges and get angry about them and depressed and life's not fair, I mean, A, your quality of life suffers because now you're focused on the negative, but B, you make slower progress when you're focused on the negative because you're not solution oriented, so you end up suffering more as a result. So that's something that I would encourage you to do. You're gonna run into challenges, hiccups, roadblocks, right? Where you're like, oh geez, now this? And so you might as well look for a positive silver lining. Sorry, I'm still like scratchy. Yesterday was really hard. I'm still recovering. I'm sitting because I can't stand very well. I've been limping around all day, but it's for a good thing. So, man, and 2 hours of sleep broken the night before the race. Last night, because of blood sugars, I actually didn't get to bed until 3 o'clock in the morning. That was really frustrating. That's something that I got to figure out now. Why? And it's happened actually a few times after races or big days. But last night was horrendous. And just to be completely transparent with you guys, my race, I was mostly in range. I told you guys I spent most of the bike ride, once I got it figured out, between, what did I say, 117 and 135 or something like that. The run, I was cruising at 134 for like an hour and a half. But then a couple things switched. I had to flip the plan to match the situation. I had to push my blood sugars higher because my stomach was not taking anything in, and I was like, I can't go low. So we gotta adapt, gotta change the plan. And then the high got away from me, and it took me until 3 o'clock in the morning to get it figured out. All right, my voice is leaving me, so we're gonna call this one. Appreciate you for hanging out. I hope this was helpful, learning how to navigate the different situations that diabetes is going to throw at you, finding the silver lining, being solution oriented. And remember, step 1, aware. Step 2, action. Step 3, emergency exit. AAEE. If you want to hear a full race recap and going more into the battles that I faced mentally and physically, and blood sugarically, if that's not a word, but you get what I'm saying. You know, the diabetes side of things, the challenges that erupted. Let me know in the comments. Be happy to make some content for you guys on that and recount some of the stories. But if you find this stuff useful, let me know as well. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't yet. Most of my stuff I talk on about here is, like I said, conceptual and framework driven surrounding blood sugar management for type 1 diabetes. That's what I have, and that's what I want to help you guys to master. So appreciate you for sticking around. As you can tell, I'm in a hotel right now, so we're going to be packing up pretty shortly, and I'm going to be limping across the airport so we can get home and get back to more normalized stuff now that the big goal has been crossed off the list. I am an Ironman. Holy cow. That's wild. That's been a long time coming. All right. Well, that's all I got for you guys. Have a great rest of your week. Stick around for the other videos. Poke around. See if you like anything else you see. And let me know what kind of stuff you want in the future. Have a great rest of your day. And keep up the fight.